Matthew Collins had never expected to fall in love so quickly, especially after his bitter divorce had left him feeling broken and distrustful. At 34, he had built a stable life for himself in Austin, Texas, working as a construction site supervisor. His days were long, filled with physical labor and problem-solving, but his nights were empty. That all changed when he met Isabella Reyes. It started with a simple right swipe on a dating app. Isabella, a striking 29-year-old with long, dark hair and deep brown eyes, had an effortless charm about her. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her intelligence and sophistication that truly drew Matthew in. Their conversations flowed naturally. She spoke of art, travel, and literature, things Matthew had never paid much attention to before. Yet, she never made him feel out of place. Instead, she seemed fascinated by his world, always eager to hear about his job, his passions, his dreams. Their first date was at a rooftop restaurant in downtown Houston, where Isabella lived. Matthew had driven the 3 hours from Austin just to see her, and from the moment she walked in, he was hooked. She was wearing a deep red dress that hugged her curves, her lips painted the same shade. When she smiled at him, he felt something he hadn't in years, a sense of excitement, of possibility. The date stretched into the early hours of the morning. They walked along the city's waterfront, laughing and sharing childhood memories. Isabella revealed that she had moved to the U.S. from Mexico years ago, but had a complicated relationship with her past. She didn't like to talk much about her family, only mentioning that she had distanced herself for personal reasons. Matthew, still reeling from the pain of his own failed marriage, didn't push for more details. He understood wanting to leave the past behind. Their connection was intense, almost intoxicating. Within a few weeks, they were inseparable. Matthew found himself making the drive to Houston every weekend just to be with her. Soon, weekend trips turned into extended stays, and before long, he was talking about moving there permanently. But not everyone shared his enthusiasm. "You're moving too fast," his best friend, Jake, warned. "I get that she's gorgeous, but what do you really know about her?" "She's not hiding anything," Matthew insisted. "She just doesn't like talking about the past. Not everyone wants to dig up their childhood trauma." Jake wasn't convinced. "You've never even met her family. She doesn't have any childhood pictures, no stories about growing up. That doesn't seem weird to you?" Matthew shook his head. "No. What seems weird is how much you're overthinking this. Isabella makes me happy. That's all that matters." And he truly believed that. 6 months into their relationship, Matthew proposed. It wasn't an extravagant affair, just the two of them on a quiet beach in Galveston, the ocean waves crashing softly behind them. As he slipped the ring onto Isabella's delicate finger, her eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. 1,000 times yes. In that moment, Matthew felt invincible. He had found the love of his life, a woman who made him feel whole again. Nothing else mattered. He had no idea that Isabella was hiding a secret that would destroy everything. In the weeks following their engagement, Matthew felt like the luckiest man alive. Every time he looked at Isabella, he couldn't believe that someone so beautiful, so sophisticated, had chosen him. They spent their days planning the wedding, browsing venues, and discussing honeymoon destinations. But as the wedding drew closer, Matthew began to notice small things about Isabella that didn't quite add up. For one, she never spoke about her childhood in detail. Whenever he asked about her family, she would vaguely mention growing up in Mexico and then quickly change the subject. There were no old photo albums, no childhood mementos. Even when Matthew casually asked where she had gone to high school, she would deflect, laughing it off as if it wasn't important. Matthew told himself that it didn't matter. Not everyone liked talking about their past, and maybe Isabella had a good reason to keep hers private. After all, she had told him early on that she had a difficult upbringing. He convinced himself that love was about the present, not the past. But others weren't so quick to dismiss the red flags. One evening, Matthew's sister, Emily, came over for dinner. She had been skeptical of Isabella from the start, but Matthew chalked it up to her being overprotective. "So, Isabella," Emily said as they sat at the dining table, "tell me about your family. Do they still live in Mexico? Isabella hesitated for a fraction of a second before smiling. I don't really talk to them anymore, she said. We had a falling out years ago. Emily didn't let it go. What about old friends? Anyone coming to the wedding from your side? Again, a brief hesitation. No, Isabella replied smoothly. I moved around a lot growing up. I lost touch with most people. Matthew saw the way Emily's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she was picking up on something he wasn't. But before she could ask more questions, Isabella changed the subject, turning the conversation toward the wedding venue they had chosen. After dinner, as Matthew walked Emily to her car, she pulled him aside. Matt, something's off about her, she said bluntly. I get that you love her, but doesn't it bother you that she won't talk about her past? No family, no friends, no history. It's like she didn't exist before meeting you. Matthew sighed, frustrated. Not everyone has a perfect past. She told me she had a rough childhood. Why can't you just be happy for me? Emily crossed her arms. Because I don't want to see you get hurt. Just promise me you'll be careful. He promised, but deep down, he didn't believe there was anything to be careful about. Isabella loved him, and that was all that mattered. Still, as the wedding date approached, little moments of doubt crept into Matthew's mind. He told himself he was just being paranoid, letting his sister and his friends plant unnecessary worries in his head. But something didn't sit right. One night, as he lay in bed beside Isabella, he reached for his phone and typed her name into Google. No social media, no school records, no digital footprint at all. It was as if Isabella Reyes had never existed before she met him. Matthew tried to push the nagging doubts out of his mind, but they wouldn't go away. He loved Isabella. There was no question about that, but the holes in her past were becoming harder to ignore. He wanted to believe that her reluctance to share personal details was just a result of a painful past. But deep down, something didn't feel right. Then, fate delivered an answer he never saw coming. A few weeks before the wedding, Isabella complained of persistent migraines and nausea. Concerned, Matthew insisted she see a doctor. She resisted at first, saying it was nothing serious, but after much persuasion, she finally agreed. They scheduled an appointment with Dr. Alan Whitmore, a respected physician at a private clinic in Austin. Matthew went with her for support, sitting in the waiting room as Isabella was taken in for an examination. After nearly an hour, Dr. Whitmore stepped out and motioned for Matthew to join them. Matthew entered the room to find Isabella sitting stiffly on the examination table, her hands clasped in her lap. She wasn't meeting his eyes. The doctor cleared his throat, his expression carefully neutral. Mr. Collins, there's something we need to discuss. Matthew felt a chill run down his spine. Is everything okay? Dr. Whitmore hesitated for a moment before speaking. There's something about Isabella's medical history that I believe you should be aware of. Isabella finally looked up, her dark eyes filled with silent warning. Doctor, that's private information, she said, her voice tense. The doctor ignored her. He turned to Matthew and exhaled. Your fiancé is transgender. The words hit Matthew like a brick to the chest. For a moment he couldn't speak. He felt as though the walls were closing in around him. His mind raced, trying to process what he had just heard. What? The word came out hoarse, barely a whisper. Dr. Whitmore nodded. Isabella was assigned male at birth. She transitioned years ago, but medically, there are things to consider. Matthew wasn't listening anymore. He turned to Isabella, his heart pounding. Is this true? He demanded. Isabella's lips trembled. Matthew, please, let me explain. Explain what? His voice rose. That you've been lying to me this whole time? Tears welled in Isabella's eyes. I was going to tell you. I didn't know how. I was afraid of losing you. Matthew's hands clenched into fists at his sides. His whole body trembled with shock, anger, and betrayal. The woman he had fallen in love with, the woman he had planned to marry, had been keeping this from him the entire time. I need some air, he muttered, turning on his heel and storming out of the doctor's office. He barely registered the sound of Isabella calling his name as he walked out. All he knew was that his world had just been turned upside down. Matthew stormed out of the clinic, his mind spinning. The air outside was thick and humid, but he barely noticed. He felt sick. His heart pounded so hard it echoed in his ears. Isabella had lied to him. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had planned to spend his life with, had been keeping a secret so huge, so life-altering, that he could hardly wrap his mind around it. He paced outside the clinic, running a shaky hand through his hair. Memories flashed through his mind. How she had always avoided talking about her childhood. How she never mentioned close family members. How she had quickly brushed off questions about her past. The signs had been there, and he had ignored them. A part of him wanted to walk away and never look back. But another part of him, one still tangled in the love he had felt for her, wanted to understand. After several minutes, Isabella stepped outside, her face streaked with tears. She looked fragile, vulnerable, nothing like the confident woman he had fallen for. "Matthew, please," she whispered. "Let's talk." He exhaled sharply, crossing his arms. "Talk? You had 6 months to tell me the truth. You let me propose to you. You let me plan a future with you." His voice shook with anger. "Why didn't you tell me?" Isabella swallowed hard, her hands trembling. "Because I was scared. I knew you'd leave me." Matthew let out a bitter laugh. "So, lying to me was the better option?" "I was going to tell you," she insisted. "I just kept waiting for the right moment. And then, I fell in love with you. I didn't want to lose you." Matthew shook his head. "You already lost me." A heavy silence hung between them. Finally, Isabella's shoulders slumped, and she whispered, "I never wanted to hurt you." But she had, and no amount of words could change that. Matthew turned away, his decision made. "I can't do this," he muttered. And with that, he walked away, leaving Isabella standing alone on the sidewalk, sobbing. But the anger inside him didn't fade. It grew. By the time he got into his truck and drove away, it had turned into something dark, something dangerous. And it was only a matter of time before that anger exploded. Matthew drove aimlessly through the streets of Austin, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind was a hurricane of emotions. Anger, betrayal, confusion. He had never felt this kind of rage before. The woman he loved, the woman he had planned to marry, had deceived him. He kept replaying the doctor's words over and over in his head. "Your fiancé is transgender." The sentence had shattered his world in an instant. Every tender moment, every kiss, every plan for their future. It all felt like a cruel joke. He pulled into a deserted gas station parking lot and sat there, breathing heavily. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat, Isabella's name lighting up the screen. He ignored it. Then came a text. "Isabella, please just talk to me. I love you." He slammed his fist against the dashboard, his breath ragged. Love? Was it love to keep something like this a secret? To let him propose? To let him believe in a future that had never really existed? His phone buzzed again. Another message. "Isabella, I never meant to hurt you. Please, I need you to understand." Understand? How was he supposed to understand? Matthew threw his phone onto the seat and squeezed his eyes shut. He had to think. He had to figure out what to do. His pride was wounded. His trust was shattered. And worst of all, his emotions were a tangled mess. Somewhere in his rage, a dark thought took root. Isabella had humiliated him, lied to him, made him believe in something that wasn't real. And now, all he could think about was making her feel the same pain he was feeling. He started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, his grip tightening around the steering wheel. He needed to see Isabella again. But this time, it wouldn't be for closure. As Matthew drove back toward the apartment he shared with Isabella, the tension in his chest grew unbearable. His mind was racing, spiraling out of control. He hadn't expected the doctor's revelation to hit him like this. Not with such a crushing intensity. Every part of him felt violated, as though the foundation of his entire life had been pulled out from under him. His thoughts were clouded with anger, frustration, and betrayal. He had trusted her. He had believed in her. And now, it felt like everything they had shared was nothing more than an elaborate lie. He pulled into the apartment complex parking lot, his headlights casting long shadows on the pavement. The place was quiet, save for the occasional hum of air conditioning units from nearby windows. As he parked and turned off the engine, Matthew took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. But there was no escaping the fire that burned within him. He couldn't stop the thoughts that filled his mind. How could she do this to me? Why couldn't she just tell me the truth? Why did she wait until everything was set in motion to tell me something so important? He stepped out of the truck and walked toward the building, his footsteps heavy on the pavement. Every step felt like a drumbeat in his head, each one pushing him closer to the inevitable confrontation. When he reached their door, he hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the doorknob. The thought of walking away, of never seeing her again, lingered in his mind. But the anger, the need for resolution, drove him forward. He opened the door without knocking, stepping into the apartment. Isabella was sitting on the couch, her face swollen from crying. She looked up as he entered, her eyes pleading, desperate for him to understand. "Matthew," she whispered, standing up slowly. "Please, I need you to listen." But Matthew wasn't listening anymore. His emotions were too raw, too overwhelming. "Why?" he spat, his voice rising. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you wait until we were this close to getting married? Why did you let me make such a fool of myself?" Isabella flinched at his words, but she stood her ground. "I was scared, Matthew. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought you would leave me. I thought you wouldn't understand. But I love you, and I didn't want to lose you." Matthew shook his head in disbelief. "You should have told me the truth from the start. But you lied. You made me believe we had this perfect relationship. And now I don't even know who you are." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes again, but she didn't back down. "I'm still the same person you fell in love with, Matthew. I've always been her." Matthew's chest tightened. He could feel the anger building up again, thick and suffocating. "I don't know who you are anymore," he muttered. "How could I?" He turned away from her, pacing the small living room. The space between them felt vast, even though they were only a few feet apart. The silence stretched between them, thick with unresolved tension and pain. "I never meant to hurt you," Isabella whispered, her voice cracking. "I thought I could make you see that we could have a future together, but I was wrong. I should have been honest with you." Matthew felt a wave of fury flood through him. "Honesty?" He laughed bitterly. "You think telling me the truth now makes everything okay? You've kept this secret for so long, and now you want me to just accept it and move on? It's not that simple." Isabella's face contorted with regret, but she stepped closer to him. "Matthew, please, I'm still the same person. I've always been the same person. Please don't leave me." But Matthew wasn't hearing her anymore. He was consumed with the need to hurt her, to make her feel the same anguish he felt. The thoughts that had been swirling in his mind now seemed like his only option, his only escape from the overwhelming pain. He turned to face her, his eyes wild with rage. "You think I can just forget this? That I can just go back to loving you the way I did before?" Isabella's face paled. "Matthew, please, I love you. I never wanted to deceive you. I wanted us to have a future." Matthew took a step back, feeling his body tense, his hands shaking. He knew what he had to do, but something deep within him, the faintest sliver of conscience, fought against the darkness building inside him. His breathing became ragged, and for a moment, he stood frozen, caught between the need to lash out and the realization that his actions could change everything. He was standing on the edge of a precipice. Isabella, sensing his turmoil, stepped forward once more, her voice soft but desperate. "I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Please don't do this. We can work through this." But Matthew's vision was clouded. The anger had taken over, and all he could hear was the pounding of his heart in his ears, drowning out her words. "She lied to me. She betrayed me. She deserves to feel the way I do." In that moment, he didn't think about the consequences. He didn't think about the life they had built together or the future they had planned. All he could think about was the burning rage inside him, pushing him forward. He reached for the gun he had hidden in the drawer, the one he had bought months ago for protection, but had never imagined he would use. His hand shook as he picked it up, the cold metal sending a chill through his body. Isabella froze, her eyes wide with fear. "No," she whispered, backing away. "Please don't." But Matthew's rage had already consumed him. The gun felt like a foreign object in Matthew's hand, cold and heavy, but it also felt right. It was as if everything inside him had narrowed down to this moment, the culmination of all his hurt, betrayal, and anger. The sound of Isabella's pleading voice barely reached him, drowning beneath the roar of his racing heart. She was still backing away from him, her eyes wide with terror, and for the first time Matthew saw fear. Not just in her eyes, but in her entire posture. She was trying to speak, to reason with him, but his mind was clouded, consumed by thoughts that weren't his own. "I loved you," he whispered hoarsely, his words barely audible over the pounding of blood in his ears. "I trusted you, and you—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The words caught in his throat. The betrayal was too deep, too raw. Isabella's voice trembled as she spoke, but she wasn't backing down completely. "Matthew, please, we can work this out. Please, just put the gun down." The space between them seemed vast, as if the walls of the apartment were closing in, suffocating him. Every time he looked at her, he saw her with him, on their first date, laughing under the stars, making promises for a life they would never share. Every memory seemed tainted, now stained with this dark truth. The woman he had wanted to spend his life with wasn't who he thought she was, and it shattered him. But the anger, the desire for retribution, held him in its grip, pulling him deeper. He raised the gun, his finger brushing the trigger. For a fleeting moment, the world slowed down. Isabella's face seemed to blur, her words muffled, as though she was underwater. His grip on the gun tightened. He felt the weight of his actions, and yet, in that moment, there was no turning back. "Matthew, please," Isabella cried, her voice breaking. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and it was the sight of that tear, the symbol of all her regret, her fear, and her love, that did something to him. It tugged at something deep inside, something that was still holding onto the woman he had once loved. But the rage, the burning fury, had become an unstoppable force, a tide that had already crested. There was no room for remorse, no room for mercy. The shot rang out. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the apartment like thunder. Isabella's body jerked violently, and she gasped, her mouth open in shock and disbelief. She staggered backward, clutching at her chest. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, the kind of silence that follows a great, irreversible act. Matthew stood frozen, his hands still extended, the gun trembling in his grip. His mind couldn't comprehend what had just happened. He was still in a haze, his heart hammering in his chest. The world seemed to tilt sideways. He couldn't move. He couldn't think. Isabella collapsed onto the floor, a soft cry escaping her lips as her hand went limp. Her breathing came in short, labored gasps. Matthew's vision blurred as he took a step forward, his mind desperately trying to latch onto some form of reality, some shred of clarity. He looked down at Isabella, her body crumpled on the floor, her blood staining the carpet beneath her. The weight of what he had done slowly began to sink in. His legs buckled, and he dropped the gun to the floor, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "What have I done?" he whispered to himself, his voice thick with disbelief. Isabella's breaths were shallow now, each one weaker than the last. He knelt beside her, but there was nothing he could do. Her hand reached out toward him, but it was as though the life had already left her body, her fingers trembling in vain. Her lips parted in a final, desperate whisper. "I loved you." Matthew's heart broke. The words hit him like a slap, each one like an anchor pulling him deeper into the abyss. He tried to reach for her hand, but it was too late. Her body was growing still, and her eyes were losing their light. The room was closing in, suffocating him with its harsh, unforgiving reality. This was his doing. This was his fault. Isabella was dead, and Matthew was the one who had taken her life. He stood up slowly, backing away from her, his mind still reeling. The full weight of the crime he had just committed began to sink in, but there was no way to undo it. There was no going back. He stumbled toward the door, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his mind a blur of horror. The door swung open with a creak, and Matthew stepped out into the hallway, his feet dragging, his heart pounding in his chest. He was no longer the man he had been when he entered the apartment just hours earlier. The man who had been in love with Isabella, the man who had dreamed of their future, was gone. In his place was a broken, hollow shell, haunted by the consequences of his actions. And the law, the police, the inevitable consequences that would come with this moment, they were all just a distant echo in his mind. The only thing that mattered now was the irreversible reality of what he had just done. Matthew could feel the weight of his crime pressing down on him, suffocating him. He had taken a life. He had taken her life. And now there was no way out. The hours following the tragic event felt like a blur to Matthew. His mind kept replaying the moment of violence, but the horror of it all seemed distant, like it was happening to someone else. He wandered aimlessly through the streets, his hands still trembling, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had done. The night was quiet, too quiet, and the sharp realization that Isabella was gone gnawed at him like a persistent ache. By the time the police arrived at the apartment, alerted by a neighbor who had heard the gunshot, Matthew had already broken. He didn't resist as they handcuffed him. He barely spoke, the words stuck in his throat, unable to convey the torrent of emotions crashing inside him. When they read him his rights, he simply nodded, too numb to care. The drive to the police station was long and silent. Matthew's thoughts were consumed with a single question. How did it all go so wrong? He was booked, processed, and placed in a holding cell. The cold walls of the cell felt suffocating, the isolation a stark contrast to the chaotic storm that had been his life only hours ago. His mind raced as he sat there, but there was no escape from the reality of his actions. He had killed the woman he once loved, and now he had to pay for it. Months later, Matthew found himself standing before a judge, the weight of the courtroom heavy on his shoulders. His defense attorney argued that he had acted in a moment of intense emotional distress, driven by the shocking revelation of Isabella's past. But the prosecution painted a different picture, of a man driven by rage and betrayal, who, in a moment of anger, chose to take a life. Isabella's family testified, their grief palpable as they spoke of their loss. Matthew's eyes never left the ground during their statements. The words cut deeper than anything he had ever experienced. They had lost a daughter, a sister, and he had taken her from them. Finally, Matthew took the stand. His voice trembled as he spoke, but the truth was there, raw and undeniable. He had never intended for things to end this way. He had loved Isabella, but he had let his anger blind him to everything else. The moment the gun had gone off, he knew it was too late to take it back. Matthew was found guilty of second-degree murder. The judge, though sympathetic to his emotional state, could not excuse the gravity of his actions. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. As the gavel slammed down, Matthew felt the finality of it all. His life, the one he had once envisioned with Isabella, was over. He would spend the rest of his years in prison, paying for a crime that had taken everything from him. In the quiet of his cell, Matthew couldn't escape the haunting image of Isabella's face, her tearful eyes locked in a silent plea for forgiveness. He knew he could never undo the damage he had caused. All he had left was regret, and it would follow him for the rest of his days.